Well, hello, welcome to ASCM, Association of Supply Chain Management, Inland Empire, also formerly known as APIX, Inland Empire. We are here with John Tulac in our part of our webinar series, and we're going to be talking overall about adapting supply chains, which by all means is a critical topic in today's in 2025. And so with that said, this particular topic is about China and the supply chain, geopolitical realities and trade strategies. I really can't think of anything more important that's going to impact the global supply chain currently. So it's certainly a hot topic. And John is a expert in this topic. John is an international business attorney specializing in international business law and cross-border transactions. He's got 48 years of legal practice, amazing, John, as well as an adjunct professor, mediator, and arbitrator. He's known for helping U.S. companies successfully navigate complex international markets. He advises clients on importing, exporting, joint ventures, licensing, and long-term partnerships. I know he has some specialized expertise in China. He has trained judges in China that came over for many years. And he also has a specialty in some other geopolitical topics such as oil and gas, so in energy. So John is a wealth of expertise, and he and I are going to do an interactive discussion today. And I am Lisa Anderson, president of ASCM IE, Inland Empire chapter. And I'm also president of LMA Consulting Group. We are consultants that work with manufacturers and distributors and help them improve their performance to their bottom line. So with that said, we'll get started. So John, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to your intro, feel free, or maybe kick us off with a start to this topic, and then we'll have an interactive discussion. And as we say that, please feel free to put questions in the chat, and we'll also, bring you all in to ask some questions later on if you're interested. So John, feel free to kick us off here on this massive undertaking of a topic.
All right, Lisa. First, thank you for having me as a guest to speak to your group today. I always look forward to doing any discussion with you because you're so knowledgeable. I think as we're coming to the end of 2025, we can say that once again, this is a year that embodies the famous Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times.
For sure.
Certainly been interesting this year. It's been a year fraught with peril in a lot of ways for companies, not just in the United States, but anywhere in terms of dealing with what's going on in the world, not only with what China is doing and how it's doing it, but also, major changes in policy with respect to foreign affairs and foreign trade implemented here by the current administration. So it has created, in both places, real challenges for companies, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. So talking about this regularly, because in some situations it changes rather frequently compared to what is normal, and keeping up is difficult. But that's what we have to do if we're going to have a strong, healthy supply chain and not put our companies at undue risk because we weren't paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, it's very true, actually. I mean, there was many years where obviously not every company, but a lot of companies were really offshoring production and specifically to China. And I have a graph that I've used in other presentations, but in essence, it shows that since the World Trade Organization came into effect, the U.S. went from being one of the highest producer to crossing lines with China, if you will, to a much lower level producer. And China went from being, low to being the world's largest producer. So it's a rather distinct change that's occurred, and now there are a lot of geopolitical tensions with China. So I don't know. How do we summarize where we stand with China, or maybe how we got to this point, and then we can talk to the recent discussions between Trump and the president of China and go from there? What do you think, John?
That works. And of course, that question just puts me right into my usual discussion intro about any global topic is how we got there. We got there by doing a lot of the right things in the right ways. When we think of the process of globalization, it's really something that the United States led, created and led from start to finish. And we haven't finished with globalization. But just look at where we've come. We lifted 2 billion people almost out of poverty. And depending on how you calculate it, anywhere from 600 to 900 million of those people were in China. When this process started, you forget just how weak China was in terms of its internal economy. You got out of the big cities, the special economic zones, and so on. You went back in time 100, 150 years. And it is amazing how much China has achieved. But how did it achieve it? It achieved it because of our foreign direct investment in China, in bringing manufacturing over there with our licensing of technology and so on, and with our consumption. Now, how were we able to consume so much? Because we created more wealth than anybody else in the world, and we continue to do that. That's why the balance of payments deficit means absolutely nothing. When you consider how that's created, it's created by our ability to spend money, money that we earned by what we do here. And then the other thing that's truly amazing is that our manufacturing sector has fallen to under 20% of our economy. And that's an impressive statistic when you consider just what our output from our manufacturing sector truly is. But when you then put it into the global context, 80% of our manufacturers with an exportable product don't export at all. And that means if you do the math, roughly 4% of our economy is the second largest exporting powerhouse in the world behind China. We do it with 4% of our economy. They do it with 80 to 85% of their economy. So I'm not concerned about our strength economically. Our strength is still really strong. What I'm concerned about is we have screwed it up in terms of impact with really ill-considered voodoo, bad economics with tariffs and trade barriers because we think that we can manage trade. That's called mercantilism. That's what China's been doing. And there are just a lot of wrong-headed folks, I shouldn't say folks, it's wrong-headed thinking that, oh, well, in order to match China, we need to do the same thing. But anybody who thinks that is not understanding basic principles of economics that say that's not the way to do it. We still come out ahead by engaging in freer trade. The United States has historically never had true free trade, but for most of its history, it's had freer trade than most any other country in the world. And we've taken and screwed this up a lot in the last 9 months. And we're paying a price for it, and we will continue to pay a price for it until we find a proper rebalancing.
Well, for sure. So we should like talk to, I mean, I think there's a, I mean, it's a complicated topic because there are geopolitical risks associated with China, and we've had many discussions about that. So maybe you could talk to those, and then part of the answer, or the proposed solution, I guess you could say, was the tariffs. That's like leads us down a different path that we should talk about. And then there is like, what should we do going forward, right? I don't know if you agree with that, John, as far as like the paths here, but I know that for the geopolitical risk side and for folks doing business in China, that you have grave concerns. And the other hand, you also have concerns about the tariff policy. So like we just have to split these up so that folks can like understand like what your, what your, I guess what are all the different like I don't know, those maybe it's those three paths. I don't know if you agree with me, but basically it's like the current state and the concerns you have, and then there is like the trade side, and then there is what do we do about it? Because we have to address the concerns. Or what do we, what should we do? Just move our supply chain somewhere else, maybe. I don't know. But anyhow, that I'll leave that to you.
Well, let's start with China itself. And my biggest concerns there are internal. It starts with Xi. And I started doing an annual briefing called Whither China in 2012. It was a comprehensive overview of China, its political state, its foreign policy, and its economy, and what that meant for US businesses. And I was already alarmed. Concerned was probably the right word in 2012. But by 2014, I was alarmed by what I was seeing with Xi's approach to a number of things. And I started warning US companies that China was no longer a sure bet. If it was not a sure bet for selling to China, and it was not a sure bet for having your supply chain originate in China because of what I saw in terms of bad policies. And the bad policies were all coming from the top. And nothing has changed to this day, except they've gotten worse. China's internal economy has not transitioned as it should be to a more internalized consumer focus, get the people to spend money on themselves and on building a true middle class. Now, China's economy went from having virtually no middle class to having a much larger one. But China's policies keep getting in the way of people really being able to feel comfortable with the wealth that they have earned by being a mom and pop manufacturer, for example. And in recent years, we have seen a return to the political officer being embedded in Chinese companies. Someone to make sure that you don't get too economically focused on your entrepreneurism.
What does
It,
that mean? Are
it,
you saying there's people from the government that are like, I don't know, like
watching,
what are you really
watching
saying?
you, watching you.
Okay, I see.
And remember, this is society-wide. There are all kinds of ways by which the Communist Party and the government uh, can control by spying on and being aware of almost everything that their citizens do. The internet is censored heavily. Gaming is restricted in terms of number of hours. One of the concerns that the government has, and rightly so, but they created the problem, is that young men are increasingly unemployed or subemployed, especially the college graduates. And
Right,
so the slang expression is, as it's translated to English, is that they are lying flat. They aren't working or they're
right.
not working hard because they're subemployed. And so what do they want to do in their spare time? They want to be on the internet playing games. And that's the primary reason that gaming time was restricted because of this phenomenon. And of course, the other thing was they want the students to be studying, not gaming. And so young people are also restricted from spending too much time on screen with gaming. So this is part and parcel of the Chinese government wanting to control virtually every aspect of their citizens and what they do and how they do it. And that
Well,
means
so
that innovation is stifled.
for sure they can't innovate. Are you saying though that like, because I heard this from I think the Treasury Secretary maybe, but he was saying the same thing that China has a manufacturing society. Like they're thinking about like manufacturing and selling to the world, but they aren't thinking about consuming. Like, so what does that mean? Like you're saying that the government's not stimulating their or not like encouraging them to consume, I
Right.
guess.
The government is stimulating the wrong thing still. And it doesn't know how to do it any differently. So they go to things that have historically worked. Historically, they have spent billions upon billions of dollars on infrastructure and in making sure that their state-owned enterprises are always employed doing something. The problem is they've run out of infrastructure to build that's worthwhile to build. And so they came up with the Belt and Road Initiative to try and give the state-owned enterprises ability to build things somewhere else, which was actually pretty clever. But at the same time, you end up with all this stuff that is basically sitting there doing nothing. You have airports that are empty. You have trains that are largely empty in certain corridors. You have more empty apartment units than there are people in Germany. Apartments that are built and are empty, some of which have been empty for 10 years because there's not enough people to go into them. Despite the hundreds of millions of people, they all have housing and they don't need any more. So some of them could definitely go upscale, but they can't afford to move into these buildings. And so you have these things literally decaying because most of them are only now getting minimum maintenance to keep them going. I mean, there was a woman who died, a cleaning woman who died because she went in to do maintenance. There was a power outage and she was stuck in an elevator. Well, no one remembered that she was in there.
Oh,
So
geez. Well, so it
it's
sounds
nothing
like,
terrible. So to finish the thought, Lisa, the folks that who did have money,
yeah,
from entrepreneurism, from manufacturing, and so on, where they put their money in, they bought a house or they bought a bigger house. And
yeah,
the real estate bubble built up to the point where it's kind of remarkable that it's still there when you think of all the empty units. But
right.
instead of buying things and adding to lifestyle, instead of demanding services, they save money or they put it in real estate.
I
And
see. So that's where they're not consuming
right,
that
and
way.
only grudgingly into the stock market, which is actually still doing pretty well, surprisingly so.
So basically what you're saying is that, China's run out of things to manufacture, and especially these days because the world has realized there's risks associated with it. But with that said, I guess what are like I know that in other webinars then you've said definitely move your production out of China over time because there's too many risks. Like what are those risks that you're concerned about? Obviously not. I mean, it relates to the fact that they're not consuming and they're only producing, but there's other risks. What are the risks to other people like us, like the US?
Right. So let's start with the basic one. In my view, you should never be sole source reliant on any one company or any one country for the things that are critical to your business. That may be for a finished product, or it might be for a critical component for whatever your finished product might be, wherever it may be finally produced. So you should always look at how do I build resiliency into my supply chain? And if you don't necessarily have more than one supplier already, what's my plan B in case something happens to my one and only supplier? And how quickly can I pivot to that company somewhere else? And to me, that somewhere else should be outside of China because the second major risk, which only has been growing in recent years, is you look at China's internal problems. Any number of things could cause a breakdown in your goods, especially coming from the interior, to reach the port and then to get out of the port. We saw that both during COVID and subsequently to COVID with ports being shut down for periods of time. And so you don't get your goods or you don't get your goods in a timely manner. And then switching to another supplier may not necessarily, if it's inside China, solve that particular problem. But then you have the exported problem of geopolitical risk, and that is that China is increasingly bullying its neighbors. And your goods are going to leave China at the South China Sea. And they're going to navigate some fairly narrow waters to get out to the open ocean to go to where you want them to go. And these are potential choke points, especially in time of trouble, if China is
Yeah.
creating trouble for its neighbors, like with Taiwan or the Philippines or Vietnam, uh, which it's continuing to do with all three of those
Yeah.
countries. It picks fights and then they die down with places like Australia, Malaysia, and so on. Some of those things don't even make the news. They don't like Vietnam, and Vietnam doesn't like China. They're historic enemies. And so there's always the potential for an incident in and around the seas of China. And you don't want to be caught in the middle of one of those incidents, or you
No,
don't
that's for
want
sure.
to run the risk of, if I ship now, what's going to happen to my goods? This may seem remote, but when you look at the tensions, which have ebbed and flowed, but at a higher base level than ever before. You're just looking at something that sooner or later, it's a matter of time before there's a mistake or an accident that will really escalate tensions. And then especially if it's a mistake that results in shots being fired, an incursion where the Philippine Navy takes a shot, an
Yeah.
incursion where a Taiwanese fighter shoots down a Chinese plane, a surveillance vessel that gets caught out, too far into territorial waters and gets seized. All those things will just ratchet tensions dramatically. And then where's your ship? Does the your third party carrier risk sending it out? Just worst case scenarios to be sure, but those worst case scenarios are far less troublesome or too remote if you have resiliency and your goods are being shipped out of somewhere else that's a whole lot safer potentially.
True. True. So it sounds like so far you've mentioned just even getting your goods from manufacturing to the ports. And then certainly once you get it to the ports, like they have to go through the South China Seas, which is quite concerning. And they also have like all these potential skirmishes with China, I mean with Vietnam, uh, um, Philippines, and of course, oh my God, what's the third one? The
Vietnam.
thing, no, the one that's
Taiwan.
obvious, Taiwan. So basically, they have that, and but it also doesn't like during zero COVID, didn't China like stop their manufacturers from producing? So like even in the manufacturing realm, if China thinks somebody in the government, I guess, thinks that there's like a I don't know, that they need whatever it is, or they have a enemy that they don't want to serve, they'll just shut manufacturing down, right? Because they isn't that another concern?
Yeah, so they could do that at any time or with any sector for foreign policy reasons. So we're seeing that, for example, with the rare earths, which was one of their major weapons in terms of retaliation for high tariffs. They said, fine, we're not going to sell you our rare earths,
Right.
or then they backed off of that, but said, but we're going to implement a licensing regime which will allow us to say you get it or you don't get it under this scheme, which is still not fully defined yet in terms of how it's going to work. Which, by the way, from a regulation of economy for integrate with foreign policy was actually a brilliant move on China's part. So I don't like to give them credit for that, but I have to because that was one of the strongest tools that they could employ back against not just the United States, but anybody else that they've got a peak or uh, bit of anger with at any particular time for any particular reason. Like again, Australia, they have off and on picked fights seemingly randomly in terms of time, or reacting to something that has happened in Australia that is either on television or a government policy that China deems not in the interests of China. And so they'll pick up a Chinese television reporter and detain her. They've done that for no reason whatsoever. They'll retaliate with something short term in terms of goods that are designated for Australia and so on. So they can do that at any time with any country.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. So it sounds like, it sounds like you still agree with, and of course, there's the regular things that we talked about, 10 years ago, even with IP protections, because like basically they don't necessarily um, abide by any, I mean, you'd have to tell us, but I don't think they abide by really any rules of any sort. When it comes to IP, and then there's even that new law that they put in place that you told us about before, where if it goes through their server, they can pretty much see anything. So pretty much your data is like China's if you do anything there. Is that still,
That's still true.
are there problems?
Here's one of the most disappointing things that I've seen from China over time is that this continued, I'll look the other way while you steal from other companies in other countries or from other countries' governments' military secrets. That has just been what China has done. And they're not the only ones. Russia tries to do that too and has had success with it. But China created, and still has never negated, by the way, first, I should say this, it has never negated being a signatory to the major IP treaties. They just don't follow it. But what they have done internally is, and it's been getting better in recent years, is creating a cadre of government employees, mostly younger people, who have been trained in protecting IP inside China. And the reason for that is manufacturers in China that were actually innovating and creating intellectual property, whether it would be recognized by patent or protected by trade secret, were saying, we've got Chinese companies stealing from Chinese companies, and we don't like this very
Yeah.
much. So
What happened with that though? That's an interesting
they,
point.
they still have it, but it's selectively applied. And I
Of
have
course.
privilege for
Of course it is.
course it is, exactly. But for 3 years, in addition to the Chinese sending judges over here to receive training in US law and international law, and I was privileged to be part of doing the training, they also started sending over some of these new, younger IP specialists who are working for the government. And these folks, I had to say, were really dedicated in wanting to do their job properly and across the board. But if the Communist Party official in your town comes and says, you're going to look the other way on this one, that's exactly what they're going to do, which, of
Right.
course, they will never say out loud, but that's still the case in China. At least, though, they were making a start about, at least inside China, getting a little more serious about protecting IP properly. And their IP laws are actually on the books as pretty good. It's just that they don't follow them consistently.
Well, so is that still working for Chinese companies? It's clearly not working for like US companies or even European companies, but
It's certainly not on a consistent basis. And of course, the whole idea of a rule of law means that you are consistent in your approach.
well, yeah. They're
In
not going to
China,
follow it for US companies.
so in China, it's still ruled by law. So who determines that? It's the government and the Communist Party, and they will dictate how outcomes will be on stuff like that.
Well, so it sounds like and then we'll go to the trade side of things, or like the whole recent meeting here with Trump and Xi. But seems like you're saying from a supply chain resiliency standpoint, at a bare minimum. Like hopefully you've already gotten a backup source of supply, but really you should, it sounds like you're still advocating for, they should be doing more than that. And I know I'm advocating for that, that they really should be like diversifying their supply chain. It's not easy to get out of. China has built up such scale being the number one manufacturer in the world. And as you just said, the US is only doing 20% of what it needs now. So like a massive increase in the US, like hopefully in the correct products, like the ones that we can't live without, like medical supplies, defense, rare earths type of a thing, is still going to leave China producing quite a lot of products. So from a company standpoint, we need to be diversifying risk at a minimum. If not, depends on how much you have and what your capabilities are. But you sounds like you should be moving them or transitioning them away from China, and you should be a little cautious about the people you said that they could beat up on pretty easily. The Philippines,
Exactly.
Vietnam, and Taiwan, because they could come under China's control, if you will.
Right. And it's not just the countries, it's people in those countries. So a final risk, it's a low risk for the most part for American business people. But you read about this all the time, and you don't read about all the ones who get detained, at least temporarily. But if you're a business person and you go to China, you are at risk of a couple of things, of everything that you say and do being recorded, being spied upon, being in a hotel room, particularly in Beijing or Shanghai, that is bugged, a potential setup for various ways by which the government can set you up to look like you've committed a crime. And they don't even need to do that. They can just, on your way to the airport, take you aside and put you in a room somewhere and not let you out for a while, or for
Sounds
or
scary to me.
and to me, that's an unacceptable risk. When I was first doing international work, I created one rule for myself pretty early on. I will not go to a country where they solve problems by shooting at each other because
So you don't go there anymore.
I don't go, no, I do not go to China because I've become such a critic of the regime when I was once upon a
I'm
time.
sure that you would probably not come back, so please don't go.
Yeah, I'm not going. Yeah, I'm small potatoes, but I'm still vocal. And once upon a time, this is a reason why I might be more at risk than somebody else who's vocal, is I was once considered a friend of China, capital
Oh,
F,
really?
O, big C. And then from Tiananmen Square on, I was increasingly critical of how they were doing certain things to the point where and some, I think I've told this story before to one of your groups. I had a grandson of a senior party official in my office, and he brought one of the most corrupt proposals I had ever heard in my life. And I threw him out and I said, never come back. And a couple days later, I get a call from Grandpop. It said, I thought you were one of our friends. I said, friends can be candid with one another. And he said that was absolutely unacceptable, that proposal. I don't know where it came from. Don't know whether your grandson ever shared
Wow.
it with you or whatever, but no. And at that point, I was diversifying out of China my practice anyhow.
Well, you had to.
And it's a shame because
Yeah.
China would be a better country without the corruption. It'd be a better country if the Communist Party could trust their own people. But they don't.
Well, and like you said, we as an infamous accomplished a lot by bringing folks out of poverty. So there was a lot that was achieved from that point of view. So it is sort of sad that's got to this point. And you mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative, which I don't know for audience if they understand or not, but basically I'll tell you my brief understanding and you can tell me if this is right. But in essence, like you said, China believes in building, producing and or building infrastructure. So in a way, it's a way to build infrastructure in other countries. However, it does have this added benefit of if you build it in the countries that you might want to control someday, or areas of those countries, like rare earths or the Panama Canal, that you might want to control someday because it might give you influence, like they happen to be in a lot of those areas, is in essence what's been happening with the Belt and Road Initiative. On the other hand, it did give some of those countries a way to build some of this infrastructure because they financed it. Is that an accurate description or?
It is, and it's been successful in a lot of ways. Uh, it was very, very well conceived, but you got to read the fine print, which now even the most desperate countries who really need that external foreign direct investment and construction are taking a second and third hard look at it before saying yes, because if you default, basically the Chinese own it. It's strings attached that are dangerous. So
Dangerous strings.
and so you could end up with the Chinese government essentially owning and controlling ports in Europe. There
Yep.
are, energy projects in Africa or South America, less so in South America. The South American countries, by and large, have been wary to welcome Chinese direct investment. In Mexico has allowed some, but they're not happy with it and they're not encouraging it. And some of the policies were directed, anti-foreign direct investment wherever it came from, not just
Yeah.
China. And that may change with President Sheinbaum, taking firmer control in her own right of some of the policies instead of simply continuing what her uh, mentor has done.
Right.
But in the meantime, China is largely not successful in Mexico.
Yeah, and I heard, I don't, know how accurate this is, but I understood, at least I know somebody who was in Provisors, it's a group of trusted advisors that John and I are both in, but anyway, her entire business is focused on building up Mexico with interactions with the US, and like it went from like multiple years of success to like zero overnight when China stopped doing what you said was like in a not great way because they were really just trying to like get into the US market without paying.
Right.
So anyway, yep, that is true. So basically that's what the Belt and Road Initiative is. And I think from that point of view, like setting it up for the group. So rare earths, just in case you haven't been reading all of my newsletters, but rare earths are required for absolutely everything that's in our future. So certainly required for AI, telephones, electronics, uh, advanced supply chains, robotics. I mean, you name the topic, and it's required. And similarly is the what they call active pharmaceutical ingredients for building medications, etc. These are things that China has largely monopolized when it comes to APIs. India has a lot of them as well. But nevertheless, computer chips production, obviously Taiwan has the advanced computer chips production, but China has the majority of regular computer chip production. But basically that's because they also control these rare earths, which are required for all of the above. So that's why rare earths are such a serious issue. And that's partly why that's where the US and China have come into these conflicts. I mean, so that's my understanding. John, would you, feel free to correct and or tweak to that, and then we can go into what you think's going on now.
Well, what happened was that China had uh, a lot of rare earths and then realized the importance of them and then basically controlled the refining. So most of the refining of rare earths is done in China.
Yep, 80%, right? I
And
mean,
it's
it's
not
pretty
that,
crazy.
yeah, it's not that rare earths and strategic minerals are all that rare. They're all over the place, but the
Yeah.
mining of them isn't. and the refining of them even less. I'm losing my voice here for some reason.
No problem. Yeah,
Anyhow,
I understand while you're trying to get your voice back like that. I think it's forget which one's 60 and which one's 80, but basically they dominate the refining and they control mining as well. So it's pretty significant.
never should have been allowed to happen. We
Never.
we you know for good intentions from an environmental side, we just restricted mining not only of rare earths but a lot of other things that are of value here in the United States. Like, no, not in our backyard. We're not going to allow this. And because of that, we became literally on so many things sole source reliant on China. So the recent deal with Australia to
It's
get more,
huge, right?
that's a smart move, but it's like too little, too late because
Yeah,
that won't kick in right away. Uh, we can start production on one mine, or rather increase the one good mine that we have here in the United States for rare earths. But everything else, even if we green lighted it tomorrow, just waive the rest of the permitting and environmental reviews, or just dusted off old ones and said we're going to just fast track this, it would take 3 to 5 years to, at a minimum, to get a proper refined earth capability here just for mining. In doing the refining, which means not only building it, the capacity, but staffing it with the necessary expertise would take longer. And so, but we have to do that. We have to catch up for the things
for
that are
sure.
strategically important to our critical industries, especially the ones that have military application, and
Yep.
especially the ones that have health applications. So that's less so with strategic minerals. Uh, we really
Although medical
made a
devices,
mistake.
like they require all the rare earths too, because there's like technology and everything these days. But anyway,
Right.
you're right. Keep going.
But we really made a mistake by just saying, "Oh, we'll just buy it from China." You can't do that with the stuff that is directly relevant to health and safety and defense. You have to have a capacity in country to keep your defense strong and you keep your people healthy. You have to have it internally. It doesn't matter that it costs more. And there are ways of course, reforming healthcare to bring costs dramatically down, which there has been no political will to do properly. And we certainly know that we could totally change our procurement processes and our strategic planning processes to make procurement and building of the infrastructure for defense a whole lot more efficient than it is. And we know this. We also know that we have a grid on the verge of failure in many parts of the country, especially California.
California.
And we know that the cost of making that grid stronger relative to how important it is actually pretty minor. And yet we haven't done that either. So you get the government that you vote for, and the way we have voted doesn't matter, Democrat or Republican. The will to fix this stuff that we all know needs fixing hasn't been there.
So I guess that's part of the solution, right? Is that we're going to have to start doing this. I think that if nothing else, the recent, like the heightened geopolitical risks and the trade tensions, etc., have nothing else brought this to light. It's still not a no-brainer though, right? Because it's like the problem is you get used to having empty calories, if you will, and you don't want to, you want to eat your empty calories instead of having, start doing some of the right things you're supposed to be doing.
Right. It's hard, right? You need a better diet. It's hard to pass up the bag of chips that's your favorite. You
Yeah,
know you
it
need
is.
you need a strong navy. Well, then you need to figure out a way to build those ships here and build them faster. We should be flagging we should get rid of the Jones Act, for example, and let any flag move goods within U.S. territorial waters from one U.S. port to the other. But that's an immediate solution, but it doesn't replace building our own vessels for commerce either. A lot of things that we could talk about is like, how many hours do we have for this
Yeah, that's right. That's
today,
right.
right?
Well, you bring up good points though, because like the I know that part of our trade deal with like South Korea, because they have more capabilities in building ships, as an example. So it's kind of to partner on that front. And then there was some rare earth deals also made with if I'm going to get the countries right, but well, Japan, but also I think it's Indonesia maybe and another place. But anyhow, to your point, those seem like some of the steps forward that we would recommend.
Right. By the way, that was actually a pretty good deal with South Korea. So you have to give credit where credit is due. That was a true trade deal, which we haven't talked about what happened last week with the
Yeah, go
summit.
ahead. Tell us about it.
But so that it's been reported in some media outlets that this was a trade deal. That's not really true. It's a trade truce, is how I would put it. And
Yeah,
what it really did was it rolled back a few things that have come over the last few months of the tit for tat retaliations between the two countries. So it does ratchet down tension somewhat. That's a good thing. And so I would view the summit as a net positive for both countries. Now the real hard work begins. How do we restore a good balanced relationship between the two countries? And it's not just bringing down the geopolitical side of tensions, which are still it's still going to be difficult to do that because of Taiwan primarily. But
right.
we can create a better framework for our intertwined economies on the economic front. There, we should not be treating China as an enemy except when it behaves that way. Unfortunately, it's
True.
increasingly behaving that way, but it's not a true enemy yet. So it's like a frenemy. Yeah, and we need to keep the friend part as much to the fore and positive as possible while recognizing this is how you develop resiliency and this is how you plan against risk. That may not be successful, but it's in both countries' best interests to
Right.
figure this out on both of those fronts. The Thucydides trap needs to be avoided, or we may all just get incinerated by a mistake. I mean, that's the thing that,
Sure.
I'm the one talking about this. I'm the one who brings this up in every briefing on either China or geopolitical risk, is that, I don't think that, there's a danger of a war with Russia that could go nuclear, although because Putin, I think, likes his money too much. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't think that you end up with a nuclear incident with North Korea because dear leader feels the same way. But he's crazy.
Right.
So there could be a
Yeah, he
miscalculation.
is.
Pakistan and India are nuclear powers and they hate each other. That worries me, but that's regional. So the only one that could hurt us and vice versa
China.
in a nuclear exchange is China. And obviously that's the last thing that could ever happen. But if you have read Herman Kahn, his famous work was on thermonuclear war. People forget that there was a second book where he actually elaborated on the escalation to nuclear war. And there are 48 steps in the
My
escalation.
goodness.
And we're at like number 22 to 24 on the world
Yeah, it's
stage.
not good.
That we're about halfway there. And that to me is terrifying. As a kid, I grew up with the stupid air raid sirens going off once a month, and we ducked and covered. And yet, even as a kid, I understood what a nuclear weapon could do if this is really stupid. Yeah, this duck and cover isn't going to do us any good. But that's what we grew up with. And that's why to this day, I'm concerned that a miscalculation and then it goes to brinksmanship and we don't have the proper backing off like we saw at the last minute with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Cooler heads finally prevailed in both countries. But you had the potential as well for a glitch in the technology that makes it appear that there is an incoming missile and there isn't one. And you don't have a whole lot of time to figure that out, that's an error.
Yeah,
And so
that's true.
you can do to bring that down and starting with let's find a way to make peace instead of constantly being on edge for potential war is the best way to do that. So it's in our country's best interest to start figuring this out. We don't need inevitably to be enemies. We need to find a way especially with the intertwined economies that we have and will continue to have for the foreseeable future, to figure this out. We
Yeah,
have to do that.
agreed. I mean, I think from a if it was my business standpoint, I would try to be diversifying away and consider it to be not something I want to do. But from a country standpoint, totally see, I mean, that's in essence what I guess to your point about the reduction in tensions is like theoretically what we're trying to do here is bring and carry along in essence with reduce tariffs to some degree on the purchases from China, at the same time making sure that the access to rare earths is in place for the foreseeable future anyway. And to your point, though, we can't afford to waste this time because it's quite obvious that it's going to be a real issue if we don't address that problem. Right? That's
We have to be cognizant of an opportunity here that so far in the diplomacy hasn't, at least to my knowledge, been well addressed. And that's the fact that US technology in several areas could be used as a bargaining tool to get more involved with solving some of China's serious internal problems. They have an ag problem because of over farming, overuse of caustic chemical fertilizers. They have arable land that is no longer arable. It's too polluted. That can be remediated with American technology. Those same chemicals that went into the land went into the rivers. And without clean water, you die. Those rivers need to be brought back to better condition.
so
Uh,
do you
and there are other areas where our environmental expertise could really be helpful in China. There was a philosopher slash social economist by the name of John Cobb, who spent his last years here in Claremont, was on faculty at, I think, Pomona College. But the Chinese discovered John Cobb's reasoning and his books, and actually supported an institute and an annual conference here for a number of years because they saw that what he was proposing and how he proposed to do it fit with how China wanted to do things. And so things like that could be revived, like work some of this the way that will be acceptable and vice versa. China can do some things for us that we would not feel would be violative of our space. It's
right?
look for the ways by which you can build the positive side of the exchanges. I'd love to
Well,
see
I
our
mean,
judges, their
I
judges
agree
for
with
that.
you. Well, why is China not interested in this, or what is the issue there? Because like I would agree with you, like because I've heard horrible things, and I did like a little bit of a deep dive into their water, which seemed just horrific. So why would they not be interested in that? Like what is going on here?
It's again, it comes back to control, and it's a unwillingness of the government and the Communist Party to admit that some of their prior policies have caused some real harm. And so you don't then want to bring attention to that by admitting that you need somebody else's help to solve it. Now, China could solve these problems on its own if it devoted the resources to do it, which thus far hasn't done that to a large enough degree to see significant differences. It's not to say that they aren't doing anything. That is not fair to
Right,
say.
right.
But again, we could help dramatically.
Sure. I mean, to your point, it's like similar to consulting. Like clients can typically do it on their own. It's just that it could take them 10 years instead of one, or whatever, instead of 1 month instead of,
It
one
takes
year or whatever.
it takes the political will, which frankly was missing in this country for a lot of environmental things for a long period of time. And then perhaps, at least in some respects, we swung too far to the other extreme, which
Right.
was not in our best interest for certain things which are strategic in nature. And it's tough. Let's face it, there are differences of opinion that are well intended, and finding the right balance when you have competing parties and you have factions within both parties that pull you this way instead of toward the center is hard to do. But that's the
Yeah.
job of our leaders. That's the job of politics is to figure out policies that are good and then make sure that they're implemented. And China has the
Yeah.
same thing, except that they go about it with a command and control approach, top down, which stifles some of the actual things that they're trying to do because implementing it is hard that way.
No, it makes sense. So it sounds like, since, like you said, we're in the last like couple of minutes here, I'll tell you my thinking, and then maybe you can sum it up with what pieces you think we should be focused on for going forward, and or for thinking about in the supply chain. But it sounds like overall you're saying that there is definitely risk, um, different types of risk, but lots of risks in China. We shouldn't necessarily, as a country, like, you know, decouple, or whatever the word is that people are using these days. But we should be making sure that we're dealing with the critical risks, like for health and safety, if you will. At the same time, we need to be building our capabilities, and we need to find ways to work together on, because we both have strengths, and that's what I tell clients anyhow. They have multiple sites, like we can find the strengths of both and work together. The problem might come in as to whether or not we have willing partners, but it sounds like that's what you're suggesting. And from a business standpoint, though, we definitely need to be or aware of the risks that we have, and we need to be innovating and moving our supply chains if we want to, um, thrive. Because you never know you can't guarantee when these risks are going to arise or not arise, is what I'm hearing. And what do you think, John? And what would be your, takeaway thoughts here?
So it's important for every American business, for the owners and their senior people to know what's going on in the world and how it may impact them. And so that means constantly keeping up, which is hard to do when you have so many other things to do. So that's one of the reasons why I do regular briefings now on geopolitical risk is a way of helping. You have to constantly test your supply chain, and that needs to be done, with experts sometimes, but certainly asking the right questions and being in the right places to evaluate the answers that you get, so that you know that what the intel you're getting is accurate. So, the old Russian proverb that Reagan liked to quote, trust but verify. Those two
Right.
things are like foundational, or you can be a really good business people and really know the narrow things that you need to know within your particular industry, but you get blindsided by something outside of your direct knowledge or areas of expertise. So that's what I say. You have to add that capability to your foundation, or you end up with a nasty surprise.
Absolutely. No, that's great. And we appreciate it, because you've come over the years, generally speaking, once a year anyway, to give us these briefings, and they're critical. I've learned a lot over the years, and I would say that the companies that pay attention and listen are going to be far more successful than the ones that don't, because it's just these days your supply chain is just you're only as strong as your weakest link in your supply chain. And John has described many things that can be an issue with your weakest link. So we appreciate that, John. Thank you for participating with us today. I don't see any other questions. I think probably because I've like exhausted you with all sorts of questions here. But we appreciate it, and all your expertise on China and other hotspots throughout the world. So we'll have you back to talk about perhaps Mexico or whatever other hotspots you see that we should be looking at next. But we appreciate that. And for everybody else on this webinar, we have another webinar in December for our series this year, and then we're going to kick off the new year with a webinar, and also with an in-person member appreciation and networking events, so that we can get to know each other in person. So we look forward to seeing you then, and thank you again to John. We really appreciate your participation.
My pleasure, Lisa. Thank you for having me as a guest.
Thank you. All right, we'll see you all next time.